How familiar are you all with World War I? Got one semi-familiar, familiar, some of our older folks in a little bit. World War I came before World War II. And some people say that it was basically one giant war with about a 20-year delay between the two. So what we're going to talk about is how World War I laid the groundwork for World War II. Why did World War I occur? Well, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne in Sarajevo in June 28 of 1914, was the spark that lit the fuse for a war that even today historians don't quite understand the full extension of what happened, but what we did see was full mechanized war that exploded into depths of hell that nobody can comprehend. On April, I believe 4, 1917, President Wilson spoke to the congressmen and the senators and said, we need to enter this war. This was after the sinking of the Lusitania by the German, ironically enough, U-boat. Sank the Lusitania, which gave America a push to get into the war, in which 4,734,991 served. 116,516 Americans gave their lives during that war, more than any of the other wars, excluding World War II, combined of the 20th century. So this is the pen that Woodrow Wilson used to sign the Declaration of War. Photographed this at the Woodrow Wilson Museum in Washington, D.C. It was actually a gift to him and his wife from the Inuits, Inuit from the United States. Well, anyway, that's the pen he used. He borrowed it from his wife to sign the Proclamation of War. This is the breakup of what Europe looked like prior to World War I. So you can kind of see Austria-Hungary. Germany was a much larger empire. Bulgaria. What you don't see here is much of Turkey's down here. So you got the neutral powers at the top, the Central Powers here, and the Allied powers kind of surrounding and all around. This is kind of the region that the war all took place in. What you saw in World War I were brand new weapons to create this conveyor belt of death and destruction. So you saw tanks for the very first time. You had the Renault tank, which was about a two or maybe three-seater tank that was just a death trap in itself. It was just plank armor, basically, with a motor. Went about 3 or 4 miles per hour. Saw machine guns introduced for the first time. So a pretty incredible mechanized slaughter. You saw airplanes. We've talked about Mr. Allingham and what he did with his airplanes. Dirigibles as well. Poisonous gas, barbed wire to cover the trenches and to separate no man's land. And if anybody seen War Horse, as the horse ran through and got the barbed wire on. And then grenades really expanded and became a little bit more advanced in World War I. What you see here are the trenches. Miles upon miles of trenches still exist to this day. See one of the water-cooled machine guns here with the gas masks. And some folks, I think this is a training shot. But they lived in the trenches. These are what you'd call duck boards. But like we talked about, Mr. Patch from England described how eventually the mud became so bad, the duck boards would sink, and this would become basically a disease-infested, rotting section of living quarters for people. Mr. Patch, when he died, talked about not being able to take a bath. I believe it was for 5 months or something like that. He lived in the trenches. It was a crossover war. And when we talked about Mr. Pierrot teaching the horses in French, they used Civil War era technology fusing with modern warfare. So what you see in this shot is you see the horse and wagons with the helmets that are created to shield, as If you're not familiar with the World War I doughboy style helmets, it's much like a miner's helmet to shield off the dirt as it comes down off the top and it rains. But you see that all in this image. So the location of the battles, World War II, we had the European theater and we had the Pacific theater and Africa and some other spots, but primarily the location of the battles in World War I were on the Eastern Front. In Russia, we had the Polar Bear Division from West Michigan. If you're not familiar with that, they went up to the areas of Russia to fight. Northeast Italy. Ironically, about 2 or 3 years ago, I believe it was in Northeast Italy, they discovered a World War I veteran's body in one of the glaciers. So they're still discovering little pockets of archaeology. Salonika, Palestine, Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq was a battle area. German and East Africa, a little bit of Southwest Africa, and then the German African colonies and Manchuria. So another shot of the devastation of World War I, and there are a lot of interesting, it's a very fascinating war because you have lost battalions, you have, it's just all kinds of things are fusing together. So here you see almost a highway of what the battlefront and leading up to the battlefront would have looked like in the years between 1914 and 1918. You'd have transportation with the horse and buggies, but you'd also have Model A Fords. You'd have white ambulances that would transport the dead back and forth. And then you had the onset of the Spanish flu pandemic and other things that killed folks.